So, how are you? Does anyone have any question we want to ask about our sitting? No? It's all good? So, one of the basic instructions, that the basic acronyms given in meditation instruction, which is called RAIN, and it's simply an acronym where it's easy to keep in mind the different words. So RAIN, R being to recognize what you're experiencing. Simply notice, just simply notice it. There's some pain in my, leg, or there's a sound from the neighbor, or there's, some thought in my mind. That's the R. And you're recognizing it just by noticing it. But recognizing needs the A, which is accepting. You accept it, and that's where equanimity comes into play. So accepting means it is what it is, and there's nothing I can do about it, for better or worse. I'm not going to get involved. This is not my job right now. So I'm going to recognize it. I'm going to accept it. The sound is the sound. The thought is the thought. The pain is the pain. And yet, it can trigger certain fears or concerns or attachments or aversions because I'm making it into a story. So before I start making it into a narrative of my life, I go to the I, R-A-I, which is you investigate or you inquire. And that's when I say in meditation, look more closely. Look again, stay with the experience. Because when you observe it more closely, or you stay with it instead of just, shirking away or shrinking from it or going, attaching to it, is that you notice that it has the same nature of all things. And that is, it changes. It changes as you observe it. Maybe it grows stronger and more difficult, or maybe it fades. But it's not solid. It's not like a piece of you that is stuck. Whatever you're experiencing is going to be changing, and you can only notice that when you observe more closely. That's the I. Investigate. What is it I'm feeling? What is this pain? Where is it exactly? What is this thought? Not the content, but what is the nature of the thought? Is it repetitious? Does it arouse feeling? Is it coming out of boredom? Is it because I'm really restless, which is another aspect of boredom? Is it because I'm angry about something that happened to me today? So when you investigate and you look and you see that, this moment is tangled. It's tangled in a lot of past. When you see that entanglement, you know that if you get involved and start analyzing it, trying to deal with it, it becomes more entangled. So that's why, leave well enough alone or bad enough alone. Just leave bad enough alone. That's the I. You investigate and you see, well. And then the N is standing for non-attachment or non-identifying. Meaning, I'm not going to, in a simpler term, I'm just not going to get involved with it right now. I'm not going to get involved. This is not me. Yeah, it's coming from my mind, but it's not who I am. There is no who I am right now. I'm observing phenomena. So that's the non-identifying. Don't make everything you experience into a story about you. That's what we train ourselves to do in meditation, is not to see everything as all about me. Yeah. You may be the point of observation, but you're not the center of the universe. So that's what we try to practice in meditation, is being centered, but not being the center. So recognize rain. Recognize or notice what's your experience now in your body, your senses, your emotions, your mind. Recognize it. Accept it. It is what it is. I may like it, I may dislike it, but here it is. Investigate, meaning look and look again. Look a little more closely at the nature of it, not so much the content of the story. What does it do in your body? What does that thought create in your feelings? You see the process of change as you observe. That's the investigate, is noticing the change. And finally, non-identifying means, this is not reflecting me. It's just happening. And there's a lot of conditions that just repeat themselves. There's strong conditioning here. I'm going to stay with my observation and not come to conclusions. That's a non-identifying. I'm not going to make a summary statement of my state of mind just because it seems really restless or hyperactive or dull. That's what it is now, dull or hyperactive, restless or bored or, irritated, whatever your state of mind may be. Recognize, accept, investigate, non-identify. That's the basic acronym for meditation instruction, mindfulness meditation. And the techniques, though, more specifically have to do with grounding yourself in your body and in your breath. And with that as your kind of base, then the mind can do what it wants. You've got the breath to come back to and the body to keep still. So that's kind of what will keep us able to be here. The other thing is to try to notice the physiology that the breath should be a lower breath. So you're actually, a belly breath, so that the focus, at least in Zen, we teach to have 2 fingers under the navel. And you notice that area right under the navel called the hara, and you're feeling it pressing. And when you make a mudra here of your hand position, you are, keeping it there. Like, I'll just put this down a little bit. So I've got this, my mudra here. It's right where that circle is, right where my focus of attention is. Lower abdomen. Okay. And then everything is kind of grounded, more grounded. Because if my focus is here, it's shallow. So I want to feel more grounded, lower my center of gravity in my attention and in my breath. And it's a stabilizing feeling. So be aware of those things. The other thing I want to emphasize is that quality and quantity are not the same thing. Meaning more is not better with meditation. You don't have to do an hour or even half an hour. Half an hour is good. 20 minutes are good. When you're beginning, 5 to 10 minutes are probably a good starting range. It's enough to have a sort of commitment, say, I'm going to start now, 7 a.m., I'm going to sit for 10 minutes. I'm not going to get out of bed until I sit for this amount of time. I'm going to start my day with a little bit of focus, attention, and non-attachment. The practice of non-attachment, which is really important because it's not indifference. It's saying, I'm not going to hold on to things that are unhelpful. You know, not going to hold on to things that are unhelpful. That's really non-attachment. And I'm going to accept the things that pass that I may want. That's also non-attachment. You know, Suzuki Roshi said that non-attachment means, or renunciation, doesn't mean that like I'm getting rid of things. It means accepting that they pass, as all things do. So accepting that passing.
Can I ask a question, Daniel?
Of course.
About the eye of investigate, inquire. This part of meditation always puzzles me a little bit, like the vipassana aspect, like how practically to find, I guess, something like the middle way between not investigating or not analyzing at all, and like creating yet another story to get confused by, while the moment itself already passed, and like the thought that I had, or like the emotion that I had, has already shifted.
Yeah. So the investigation here means simply paying attention to its impermanence. So I want to keep it real simple, right? It's not an analysis of where is it coming from, where is it going, or why is it here, how much does it repeat, or where is this from, or even labeling, like in a Burmese style. I'm going to label it and say this is anxious thought, this is thought of past, this is relationship thought, this is whatever. No, it's more in sense of, instead of giving into the pull and push of my emotions, mainly the aversion and attachment, or the likes and dislike. Because the mind, when you have certain states of mind and you're observing them, what's happening very often is that you're being pulled and pushed like a yo-yo according to your likes and dislikes. Certain states of mind I like, so then I want them more. Bird singing, I hope the bird keeps singing, I hope the bird keeps singing. I'm not consciously thinking it, but I'm kind of, my state of mind is nice. Then the bird stops singing and I kind of feel like, oh, too bad, I wish it would keep singing again. Somebody starts drilling in a wall, in the neighbor, I'm thinking, he's ruining my meditation, I wish he would stop drilling. Aversion, when is it going to stop? This is so like unpleasant. Stop already. So I'm not so much investigating, I'm not so much getting into that story. That's not the story I want to get into. What I simply want to do by investigation is not look away. I want to create a sort of opening for that to come and go, to observe the change in the experience, and the change in my state of mind in relation to that experience. So I'm noticing, let's take the drilling, for example. Let's say I'm noticing it's unpleasant. Okay. I notice my aversion to it, right? And instead of just going to the breath and thinking, okay, if I'm with the breath strong enough, I can kind of ignore it. Because don't think that looking at the breath is a way of getting rid of phenomena that's unpleasant, right? That's a misunderstanding what the breath is doing. Okay? The breath is creating a sort of mental stability so that I can look at something pleasant or unpleasant more clearly. But that's what the breath is doing. It's offering you a bit of stability in your concentration. And then with that, and when you're feeling unstable and I can't look at something, then I come back to the breath. But if I can stay with that phenomena, even though it's unpleasant, I look a little more closely and I start to see that my response to it and the way I relate to it is changing by looking at it. it perhaps changes by being less aversive or more aversive, but I'm more interested in, how my mind is changing while I look at this phenomena. The drilling may keep going, and the drilling changes in the sound also, but by looking at something, my mind changes too. So I'm observing the whole reality of change in this moment. It's not analyzing it to come up with some idea. It's really appreciating the truth of impermanence here. The impermanence of the phenomena, but the impermanence of my mind that's observing the phenomena. Like it may become more tense and more upset, maybe less. But the investigation here is into the change of body, mind, and environment as I'm watching it happen. So I don't know if that's any more clear, but what we want to pay attention to, we want to be more sensitive to the truth or reality of change and impermanence in the things we observe. Not to impute that idea onto them, not to project that onto them, but rather to just have that as sort of our point of view. If that's my point of view, things are going to be sort of more flowing. The Dharma gives us that point of view. These three marks of existence. That's the point of view of the Dharma. What are they? There is anicca, impermanence. There is dukkha, where things are unsatisfactory. They don't give you lasting satisfaction. And there is anatta, there's non-self. If that's the general perspective of the Dharma, and in Mahayana we also have Buddha nature, where there is, all sentient beings have natural enlightenment. So with that as a sort of point of view, let's say, that's the Dharma point of view. Then the things I look at when I investigate in the I, that's what I'm starting to discover more and more. Those truths are then reinforced. Whatever kind of your interests are, that's what you're going to find in the world. If you're, really interested in, I don't know, cars, and you walk down the street and you're looking at cars, like you're going to see cars. If you're really interested in making money, then you're going to size up people and things according to how much money they have. And if you're really interested in, I don't know, art and poetry, then you'll be talking to people about that, and that'll be your perspective when you look around. And as Dharma, as a sort of primary interest, when we look at things, we look with the understanding and the point of view of impermanence, of non-self, and of unsatisfactoriness. And that's a liberating insight that allows us to be more free, so that, if I look at something and I observe something with a lot of pain or difficulty in it, then these teachings in that point of view is very helpful. It's very helpful. And if I feel a strong attachment to something, it's also, I can regain some balance because this point of view is very helpful. We want to liberate. It's about liberation and emancipation. That's what this path is about. The liberation from what? It means that we're held back in some way. And yeah, we're held back by our, the three poisons, the three fires that the Buddha taught of greed or attachment, aversion or hate, and delusion, a misunderstanding of who and what I am. So those perspectives are holding us back. And if we can use the Dharma to be liberated from those, mistaken points of view, then we can relate to the world in a much more free way, so that, a difficult situation is not going to strip me of my happiness just because it's painful. That pain and suffering are not the same thing. And that happiness and pain are not a contradiction. So that, like, I'm going to age and I'm going to, get sick and I'm going to die. Those are the basic truths that the Buddha saw when he was leaving the palace. Those do not conflict or contradict the ability to have a free mind and be happy. If they did, then we might as well stop getting old a long time before this moment. But the Buddha went to old agehood, 85, became sick and died, and he was happy. And many, many awakened people are able to do that. So there must be something, that enables them, that liberates them from the difficulties they experience, which doesn't mean that they don't experience those difficulties, but they can experience them and be liberated from them. That's the subtle point here in the Dharma. Can we experience the fullness of life, which includes pleasure and pain, and be liberated from being, defined by them? Does that make any sense at all?
Much sense. Thank you.
The important thing in our sitting especially, is to keep it simple. If the terminology becomes a little bit confounding, it's time to simplify. Sit, breathe, watch the change. And that's as basic as I can get. Sit still. Breathe calmly. Observe the change in your body, mind, and world. Is there another question we have before we discuss something else? So I mentioned the signs that set the Buddha on his way, and I've been thinking about it because this week on Wednesday, the 6th of May, it's Wesak or Vesak, which is in Theravada countries the enlightenment, the Bodhi day. Bodhi meaning enlightenment day. So it's the celebration of the birth, the enlightenment, and the death of the Buddha, all in one day. So, and apparently to very enlightened people, their birthday and their death day are the same. So, so that's the Wesak that we celebrate all across the world. In Zen, however, it is on a different day called Rohatsu, and Rohatsu is it is the 8th day of the 12th month in Japan. That's Rohatsu. So it's December 8th. And in both traditions, it's sort of celebrated by, if you are in a Sangha, by meditating all night, which we're not going to do. And by having, celebrations, a lot of teachings during the day, a lot of offerings and meals. So that's on Wednesday, but since we're not meeting on Wednesday, I thought I would talk about the Buddha's birth, enlightenment, and death a little bit tonight, just to give us a little bit of that context, in honor of Wesak. I mentioned the 3 signs, and there's actually 4 signs. The 4 signs are referring to these 4 teachings that the Buddha received when he was not yet the Buddha. And remember, Buddha means awakened one. And that came a lot of this is apocryphal or anecdotal, meaning sort of legend and not necessarily from the Buddha's words. That apparently one time after the Buddha was, awakened, and he was walking down the street, and when it first happened, and he was simply glowing and radiant. And somebody walked by and said, "What are you, a god or a deva or something? Some sort of divine being?" And he said, "No, I'm awake." And awake is Buddha, Bud. So in Pali, and so he became known as the awakened one, not the prophet, not the god, not anything like that, but just the awakened one. And then he spent the rest of his life, in the next 45 years, teaching the path to awakening for all other people, so that you could be like the Buddha, which is very different from, say, a prophet who has sort of a direct or a special access to some source. He was trying to show us how to access that source ourselves, and the source of awakening, meaning our own minds. So if you can tap that source, now that was the whole purpose of the path. The purpose of the path was finding freedom that exists as a potential in your own mind, that, watering that Buddha seed so that it'll grow. And that really makes Buddhism a very unique path, that Buddhism is the ism of awakening. So like you're trying to become awake, that's what it's about. Trying to become awake, that means in many ways, if the opposite of wakefulness is slumber or sleep or unconscious, not being conscious, not being aware, or being ignorant. So the opposite of awakening is ignorance. And what is it ignorant? What am I ignorant? What am I ignoring? Okay. So ignorance means, that I am ignoring certain truths of reality and truths of myself. And I'll talk about those, but what we talked about certainly was the truth of impermanence, and the truth of non-self, and the truth of dukkha. Those are the three main truths that we ignore most of the time, that the Buddha woke up to. And he woke up to all life being inherently, and all conditioned things being inherently impermanent. The very last teaching at the end of the Buddha's life, in the last sutra and the last recorded words of the Buddha, was, "O Sangha and monks, you should remember this one thing, that all conditioned things are inherently impermanent, or will vanish." And then he said, "Strive with sincerity to awaken," meaning you should work hard. Hearing this, that all compounded things, all conditioned things, all things that are based on causes and conditions, are impermanent. That was the final teaching. So if we can really fully awaken to impermanence of all things, that doesn't mean we don't care. It just means our relationship to them is a little more flexible and less possessive. Because possessing something that is changing and impermanent is like trying to hold water in your hands. You can hold it for a moment, but it's going to pass. And if you're dependent and you identify with that, or you're attached to it, then when it slips out of your hands, as all water does, or all things, we're going to suffer. So the nature of suffering, the dukkha part, is not so much that something is inherently bad and going to cause suffering, but because it is inherently impermanent, we create a mistaken relationship that is very likely to lead to some dissatisfaction or unhappiness because of changes. And when things change the way I don't expect, and my expectations are, disappointed, then generally I feel unhappy. So the ignorance there, the opposite of awakening, is ignoring the change in life, the inherent impermanence of all things, all conditioned things, everything, you know. So that when something breaks, like my computer or my glass, I break glasses all the time. And I've come to learn that it's like, oh, of course that would happen. I'm not going to make it happen, but when it happens, like, there it is again, impermanence. And my own clumsiness, but impermanence. And why does it surprise me? It doesn't. If impermanence and all the changes and all the, you know, accompanying loss, we can't understand impermanence if we don't also understand what it means to us. It's not like general impermanence. It's impermanence in relationship to the things that I'm attached to. That's where we get in trouble. That I find attachment to, say, the things I own, and then when they break or disappear, or the people go away, or they change, or they get sick and die, then that has hurt my sense of self. And that's what we need to explore and investigate. How my sense of self is so dependent on the world around me not changing. So this is why the Buddha's final teaching about change is so important. You know, he said, strive with earnestness. Be earnest, be sincere, be strong, be dedicated to really observing this in life, wherever you can at all times. Because that's what will help you. That's what will help you with your attachments and the dukkha. So that brings me back to the story of the Buddha. That was just a sort of detour on awakening and what he awakened to and how he expressed that in his last breath so that we could really internalize that truth and become awakened to that truth, which will release us from the attachment and grasping and suffering we have. Not magically, but as he said, with a lot of striving and earnestness. It's not it's not a free ride. So the Buddha was born in the borderland between India and Nepal of today, in southern Nepal, northern India area, and 2,500 years ago, in a place called Lumbini, that his mother was passing by and she actually gave birth. A lot of magical stuff about that birth. But his father was the chief of the Sakyas, the Sakya clan. They're divided into clans and tribes. And he was sort of the clan leader. Some stories make him out into being a big king, but actually it's just kind of a tribal leader. And Gotama Siddhartha was his name. Gotama was sort of the family name, and Siddhartha was his personal name, and the tribal name was the Sakyas. So he's the Sakya Buddha, or the Gotama Buddha, or Siddhartha. And Siddhartha grew up as the chief's, son in a kind of palace. And when he was born, one of the some wise visitor, some sadhu from India came and visited and saw him, had heard about this wonderful child, and looked upon the face of this Buddha, of the Siddhartha, and said, your son is going to be either the greatest sage that the world has ever had, or the greatest king. And the king was both satisfied and terrified by this news. Satisfied because, of course, he wanted him to follow his footsteps and be an even greater king. And terrified because, what? A sage? A homeless monk? No. So, according to the legend, he then enclosed his child and kept him in the palace so that he would not experience anything from the outside world or any messages, spiritual or otherwise, that would take him outside of his father's path, which was to be a warrior king. Of course, and a part of that, the interesting was that he didn't allow anybody who was like old or sick or dead into the palace. So everybody was young and beautiful and healthy. But of course, children are curious. And when Siddhartha was older, he eventually got married and had a son called Rahula. And Rahula is translated, it means bondage or chains, fetters. It means fetters. So he was aware that he was kind of tied down by the family life. He had a deep pull to practice a monastic lifestyle. And with his cousin Channa, he went outside and escaped the walls and went outside to see what was out there. And he saw things he had never seen before, and he had no idea what they were. And the first vision he saw, he asked Channa, "What is that? What's wrong with that person?" And he said, "Oh Lord, that is a sick man. He's sick." Like, what is sickness? All men become sick, said Channa. It's just part of the human condition. And as they continued on, he saw someone who was, gray and bent over on a walking stick. What is that? He'd never seen someone who was old. Oh Lord, that is an old man. Couldn't believe it. Never seen that before. That seemed like an even worse sickness. And then finally, he saw someone being carried on a funeral procession to go to the burning pyre to be cremated. And what is that? It's a dead man. Death. Big revelation. Imagine reaching your 20s and not knowing about death, sickness, or aging. Those were called the 3 signs that woke him up in the beginning. And finally, he met along the road near the burning ghats, the place where they burn the bodies near the river, a sadhu, a holy man sitting in meditation and breathing peacefully near the burning pyre. And he asked him in astonishment, "How can you maintain composure while all of this is going on?" And he said, I found the way to peace. And the Buddha left that was the 4th sign. And he basically resolved to himself, with all of this going on, I'm gonna discover what that holy man has discovered. So in the middle of the night, he escaped from the palace. He left it, and his wife had a newborn who was 1 week old. Rahula was 1 week old, and he left the palace. And he went in search of freedom from the signs, from the great realities of sickness, aging, and death. Of course, upon witnessing those, he was full of fear and anxiety. He spent 6 years practicing with. He was 29 when he left the house, and he spent the next 6 years until the age of 35 practicing with a group of 5 different ascetics, people who practiced very, very extreme yogic practices that were being taught during that time. And he tried them, and he also went to different monasteries. And at each place he went to, he kind of went to the limit of what they could achieve. He was offered abbotship and then continued onward. Finally, traveling in the forest with these 5 companions, until he, after 6 years, he tried everything and had not achieved full awakening. He was near Gaya in Bihar, India, and he was he had passed out from weakness and hunger. And a passing ox herd girl named Sujata saw him lying on the side of the road and offered him some milk rice, some rice pudding, he woke up from his weakness and took a spoon of that. He finally had a further awakening where he realized that all of the self-deprivation had not been the way. And he started what was called the middle way between extremes. The extremes of self-indulgence and self-denial. Self-mortification, depriving yourself or indulging your desires. And he ate that rice. His companions saw him eating the milk rice and abandoned him, thinking that he had given in to desire. He had the strength, though, to then make the resolution that he was going to sit under this tree that he found until he became awakened. And apparently he sat for 49 days in one version, and he sat under that tree. Another version is just one night. But during that one night, he had his final journey through his mind, where at the end of the night, when the morning star shone, he had full awakening. And in the Zen version, when he awakened, according to Dogen, he said, I and all beings on earth together have achieved full awakening. So in the Mahayana version, which is expressing the truth of the Buddha nature, he realized the nature of all beings, which was the very awakening that he had realized. In the Pali version, it's a bit different, but that's okay. I and all beings have achieved full awakening. So he went around seeing that seed of awakening was in all sentient beings, all beings. I want to talk a little bit about that night that he spent to share it with you, because the night of awakening was a momentous one, and it really started something new, a new journey in the for the rest of the world, really, in terms of world spirituality and a path to awakening that had not been practiced before. So the night of awakening that the Buddha sat in under the Bodhi tree, which was actually called a pipal tree, and it's a type of Indian or Asian fig, and it's now called the Bodhi tree. It has distinctive heart-shaped large leaves, and he sat under it. And it was divided, the night was divided into 3 watches. In the first watch, which was like from 10 p.m. to 2 p.m., from dusk to 10 p.m. And the first watch where he sat there and he apparently was able to observe all of his past lives. In Buddhism, there's the belief in past lives and in reincarnation of one life leading to another. That in the West has been not emphasized at all, because it is a very foreign idea for us to think about having past lives. Is it literal? Is it metaphorical? What is it? Is it your same consciousness? Is it some spark of life? Is it a soul? What is going from one life to another? And even in the text, they don't give explanations other than sort of a metaphor of one candle passing to another candle. The flame is passed to the next candle. It's not the same flame. It's not a different flame. What is it? That's what they resort to, is sort of these metaphors. But what the Buddha was trying to teach by talking about these different lives was this sense of responsibility of karma. And that was the purpose of examining all these past lives and all the change from one life to another. And as he went into the second watch of the night, is to observe how karma, how our actions and our choices then lead from like one life to another. And that life can be either like a reel from one life or just from moment to moment, a cause-effect relationship. And that's what karma is really talking about. So either you can think of it as the Buddha taught in terms of lives, or just in terms of moment to moment. The moment from this second is a result of the moment that just was. And the moment that will be is a result of the thoughts and actions and decisions I make now. So there's a sort of a karmic relationship, a flow, a cause and effect relationship in my life, which I need to be aware of and take responsibility for. And that brings it into a moral dimension, so that like rebirth and lives don't just happen, but they're the result of the way I lived this life. And that's a really important realization, that, you know, good and bad just doesn't happen. I don't mean the good and bad outside of us. I mean what's happening in my mind. My states of mind are the product of the thoughts I generate. And that's what karma is. It's the choices I make, you know, have an effect on what's going to happen next in my life, for good or bad. So that's what the Buddha realized, is this whole truth of karma, which is basically another way of saying personal responsibility. By noticing the flow of lives, he was also noticing the change in one life to another and the sense of impermanence. And he sat and observed impermanence. That was the next thing he was observing. And by looking at all this change happening, he was seeing how there's so much dissatisfaction, and so much of the choices, so many of the choices I make are fueled by and motivated by my desires and my aversions, by my wants and my dislikes. And so much of what I do and think and say and choose is based on desire or attachment and aversion. And by noticing that and how it had a karmic effect on all the lives that he lived, he uncovered the truth of dukkha, of, you know, this difficulty and dissatisfaction that's inherent in all these choices. Because I keep making choices because it's never satisfying. It's never really satisfying me. Right? So there's a problem by living my life according to my wants. And that's the truth of dukkha that he found. Now, in this in this night and in these watches that led to the shining of the, at the end when the dawn struck and the morning star appeared and he had the final awakening, there was also where he was facing not only what he was realizing in terms of wisdom, but the difficulties and the doubts that he had. And one of the interesting things about the story of the night of awakening of the Buddha is that even at the end, strong doubts appear. Strong doubts appear. And this is, and strong conditioning still arises. And it's actually reassuring for us who may not be as close to enlightenment as the Buddha was on that night. Well, probably not. I'll speak for myself. I'm not. But what that means is that at any moment when you're sitting and when you're practicing and when you're trying to purify your mind from the greed and the aversion and the confusion, you're trying to let go of those, and you have clarity and insight. In that moment can arise strong doubt and strong desire and strong aversion. And that's part of the practice, is being ready for that to surprise you. Now, it surprised maybe it didn't surprise the Buddha, but it came up in the image of Mara. Mara is the image or the god of hatred, and sort of represents evil and destruction in the Buddhist world at that time. And Mara threw at him on each of those 3 watches of the night a different challenge. The first one was desire, whereas, you know, a young man, he sent all of Mara's daughters, who were these beautiful dancing women, to seduce him. So basically that was representing sensual and physical desire. And that can come up. And that, believe me, that came up I mean, this is being taught is coming up when the Buddha is at the, at the moment of awakening. Physical desire comes up. He sat with it. And the next watch, Mara threw at him, sent armies of warriors and spears and all sorts of threats to his life. And that was strong fear or aversion. So there was attachment and attraction and desire from the daughters of Mara. There's the fear from the armies of Mara, or aversion. So the likes and the dislikes. And at the cusp of awakening, really the moment of awakening, there is desire, there is fear. And the last thing he sent was, he said in the third watch, he said, okay, maybe you're an awakened one, but who's going to believe you? Like, who are you to be awakened? Like, who am I to believe here? Like, who are you? Who's gonna believe you? And that was creating doubt. That was creating skeptical doubt. That sense that, me awakened? Well, or just, this is an awakened being? Forget the me? There is awakening? Is there really awakening? Is it possible? Is there any truth to this, that there can be Buddha nature, that there can be true awakening? Is that teaching really reliable, or is it just like a nice dream? Maybe. And that's the doubt, the last thing that Mara sent to him. And that came at the moment of awakening. And he put his hand in this famous mudra where he touched the ground and he said, the earth is my witness. And that's a beautiful teaching of saying, I'm not relying on my mind, on my confidence or my friends or whatever. I'm on the ground. I'm sitting here and I'm doing this on planet Earth. I am connected. I'm connected I'm grounded. My awakening is not, a spiritual or physical. It's here and it's present. It's life. And I trust life. And I trust the ground I walk on. And the ground is holding me and supporting me. So that was the final breakthrough, which was to say, you're not going to get people to vouch for you. You're not going to get anybody in this life to vouch for your awakening. If anybody tells you you're awakened, you should wonder. But if you can touch the ground and feel secure where you step, and step by step, you can feel that groundedness and accept and allow for the truth that there's nothing to prove. Because the person who's trying to prove it is just a part of attachment to yourself. But when there's nothing to prove, there's nothing to lose. And then you can just be comfortable in your skin on the ground. And that's the third watch where the Buddha touches the ground. And this, that journey to the end, to the morning star, which had to go through those three poisons that the Buddha taught and very clearly afterwards. Aversion, attachment and desire in all its forms, whether it's sensual, sexual, physical, intellectual, even spiritual desire, whatever it is. I want to be desired. I want to be enlightened. Those are Mara's daughters dancing in front of us, or maybe his sons, if you prefer that. But then there is the fear and the anxiety that we feel so often. What's the future going to hold? What's going to happen? Can I do this? What's wrong with me? The world is gone to hell. That fear, whatever aversion and negativity, those are Mara's armies racing at you, wanting you to falter. And that's where you have to gain some courage. And finally, that courage comes from finding yourself right here on the ground. And that's the third teaching, the third challenge Mara threw at the Buddha on the night of the Bodhi tree, which was, who's your witness? The earth is. not me. I'm not vouching for myself, because our minds are confused, and that's okay. But what's not confused is the ground you walk on, the cushion you sit on, the air you breathe. Those are not confused. So when you find yourself grounded, you can then feel confident in your path. And that's what allowed the Buddha to break through to full awakening. It's never done, though, this journey. Even then, it wasn't done. He was just beginning. And there are many lessons we can get from this, from the Buddha's night and the Buddha's story. The difficulties he had to go through right at the edge of awakening, they're always with us. They're part of our path. And even when he became fully awakened, apparently he sat for a week, and in another version, again, 49 days, not wanting to get up because he thought that nobody would, be able to appreciate or accept the teaching and the insight that he had, until Brahma came and begged him and simply, convinced him that he needed to teach and he needed to go out into the world. So even after awakening, he still needed more work to be done. And there's a koan like that where it's called "Ordinary Mind is the Way." And when Joshu was asked, what is the way? And he said, ordinary mind is the way. He was asking Nansen. And then Joshu said, what is the way? And Nansen says, ordinary mind is the way. And Joshu asks him, ordinary mind is the way of enlightenment, then if I go for it, how can I go for it? How can I pursue it? And Nansen says, if you pursue it, it becomes farther away from you. But if you don't pursue it, you're lost. After that, Joshu apparently had an awakening. In the commentary, though, it says, even though Joshu had an awakening, he still needed 30 more years in order to fully realize this, the truth of this. And here we see the Buddha, after awakening, he still needed convincing to go help other people. And he still, had more to do in his path and in his practice. So we don't stop at awakening. Awakening, in a sense, is our beginning, where we know how much now we need to work in order to really make a difference and help. And as we see from the Buddha's life, and the Buddha's life is very instructive, even though he wore the perspective and the point of view of the impermanence of all things, as he said in his final teaching, rather than becoming detached and indifferent to that, in order to, that would be a grave misunderstanding of impermanence. He became more engaged and said, I'm going to help everyone who's so attached and suffering because of that. So his understanding of impermanence and how people were so ignorant of it aroused his compassion. So the true understanding of impermanence is that if all things are passing, it's not that we become uncaring or indifferent. It's that we can let go of our attachments so that we can be more engaged in order to help others. It's about dealing with our attachments and helping others deal with theirs. At the end of the Buddha's life, apparently he ate a poison mushroom or some rotten pig. I don't know. There are two versions. But he went to eat at while he was traveling, and he was in his 80s. And they would accept offerings from people, from other, villagers. And there's a villager named Sunda, and he was a metal worker, a smith. And he offered him a meal. He really wanted to give him the meal. And he was poor, and so accepting alms from the poor is actually a huge merit for both sides. You know, when you go to traditional Buddhist countries and you see the people who are the most generous are usually the poorest, who come out, they get up early in the morning and they cook their food to offer it before they eat their food. And they give the best that they wouldn't eat themselves. It's really quite amazing to see the generosity there, the dana. And so he received the Sunda's meal and became sick from food poisoning, and it basically killed him after a few days. But he made sure to instruct Ananda, his close follower. He said, there are those who are going to blame Sunda. Sunda had nothing to do with this. Don't blame Sunda. Sunda, this is not Sunda's fault. People make mistakes. Blame is unhelpful. We're here to awaken and help others awaken, to be free from suffering, and to accept that huge mistakes are going to be made along the way. And until we reach final awakening, and probably even after, we're still going to be dealing with the old issues of our attachments, our greeds, our desires, our aversions, our dislikes, and even our anger and hatred, and the confusion of not knowing what to do or why I'm here. As the Buddha did, even up until the moment of awakening. But now that we're on this path, we know that it can happen. And awakening is not just something that's a distant possibility, but it's a seed inside each one of us that if we care for it, it will grow. So I really wish all of us a very meritorious Vesak and week this week. It's a special week and a special time to practice, keeping in mind the deep teaching and path that the Buddha opened, and many Buddhas since then have developed and maintained until today. And we are still on that same, tradition all this time. So before we take a minute to sit and finish, is there any comment or question anyone would like to say or ask? So let us resume our posture for a minute so that we can close tonight. Feeling deep appreciation for the teachings and feeling deep gratitude for the perspectives that have been taught and the wisdom that's been passed down over generations that has come to our homes right now. That the Buddha Dharma is available to you and a path to freedom. And breathe and feel the confidence of your body and mind and breath sitting here now in this place on this ground. Let the earth be your witness. Let your breath be your anchor. And let your mind be your friend. Let us dedicate our practice and our lives to practicing the way of awakening. May we become fully awakened in this lifetime in order to help all other beings realize their true nature. May all beings end suffering and find happiness.